This is Office Hours,
a show for sharing experiences and stories in governance, risk management, and compliance.
In the last few moments, the first results have been released following an investigation of one of the biggest ever leaks of offshore secrets. 13 million documents, mostly from an offshore law firm called Appleby.
So, as you might have guessed, we're going to talk about 13 million records of shady business happening in the Paradise Papers today. I'm Dan. We have our first guest co-host today, Phil, the Director of Content Solutions here at ACL. Hey, Phil.
Hi, Dan. Good to be here.
Show us what you're going to tell us about today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Paradise Papers, but first, I have a question for you, and maybe for the folks out on the line as well. Have you ever found anything as a GRC professional that might get you fired?
It's funny, you asked me this question before we started, and the one that immediately came to mind for me is I worked with a large financial services firm, specifically a mutual fund company. Obviously, the portfolio managers and investment officers at mutual fund companies hold an awful lot of power. They're the home run hitters of the team, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We were asked to evaluate executive expenses, and you can guess where I'm going next. We found a number, in particular, a important investment officer that had been taking inappropriate let's call it inappropriate golf trips to Mexico as part of their fund expenses.
Did anyone get fired?
No, but the good news was I didn't actually work there. I was a consultant, so I couldn't get fired, although I would imagine it was a very tenuous board meeting.
Yeah, did they hire you again?
I don't remember. I left the firm shortly thereafter.
Okay. I was also part of a consulting deal or a consulting engagement where the client had found out that their own chief audit executive had been using...
Chief audit executive?
Yeah.
Ouch.
That had been going on company trips that would, and then actually go up to sporting events like football games and baseball games. There was just nothing, they don't even have an office in some of these locations that he was going to. And yeah, just going to watch sports games. Seems
we have T&E as the route to get fired. So what's that have to do with Paradise
Well,
Papers?
The problem here is that how this came up was I was actually working with a client that was worried about the reputational risk of Paradise Papers if it was found out through investigative journalism or other methods that they were actually offshoring their profits by funneling money through subsidiaries in the Bermudas or other offshore sources.
I see. So now that this data is imminently public, let's get ahead of this. Just do a check and make sure there's not something that's going to cause us a front page issue.
Exactly. Yeah. So as you probably know, a lot of folks have been on the front page for being named in the Paradise Papers, mm-hmm. and organizations just want to have that assurance that they're all not behind that and they want to get ahead of it.
So we had the news clip at the beginning. Can you just mention, because I think one thing, even myself, I get confused. There's been so many of these types of leaks lately. What's the difference between the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers?
Yeah, Panama Papers came before that. Paradise Papers were specifically the Appleby law firm's leak of that data. And so that actually came out, you'd be surprised, but Paradise Papers was only about 7 months ago mm-hmm. that it was leaked as of the recording right now. But Panama Papers were before that. There were the Bermuda Papers and other leaks as well before that. But the Paradise Papers was the most recent and most wide-ranging leak where you'll see like the Queen and Bono being implicated in the Paradise Papers, for example.
Right. So with a leak of that size, especially this recent, it's certainly worth the small investment of time to say let's get ahead of the curve here.
Yeah, so I actually put ACL's data through this thing, and we found that we were funneling a lot of money with ACL through.
Oh, you think Bermuda. You're a funny guy, don't you?
Yeah. I did not do that because I realized that I didn't want to get fired, so I put actually...
Just your sense of humor is likely to get you fired.
Exactly. I put the USA government spending through the Panama Papers. I pulled down, I went to usaspending.gov, downloaded all of the contract data for a few of the departments of the United States, and pinged that against the offshore database.
Now, the other thing I was going to say is worth the time to check, get ahead of it if you're an organization that may have a problem.
Right.
But if you happen to be a regulator or similar, And let's say the IRS or one of the many other taxing authorities we work with around the world, this might be an opportune technique to see where we can have a look and see who might be running some tax avoidance, if nothing else.
Great point. And as we get into some of the actual results that we get out of this, we'll come back to that. I think.
Great.
Now, it's not super easy. So why the client came to me in the first place was working with the data was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
There's two pieces of the challenge with the data. Number one, it's in a graph database. You know what a graph database is?
I know what a graph database is roughly, yes.
Cool. So yeah, whenever you see pictures like this that I have on the screen, that sort of visually represents how a graph database works. It's when you have a lot of interconnected entities, like entities where you're funneling money through subsidiaries and intermediaries. Graph databases are a great way to not have duplicated data everywhere because so many things are connected to.
But arbitrary connections between the nodes.
Exactly. So why this was challenging was we've got these 6 different files. When you go to download the Paradise Papers data, you download them in these 6 different files, and they're called edges and nodes, and it's a few scary different things if you're not familiar with it. Essentially, it's just you have a list of addresses, and they're not really connected to anything by itself. You need to look at the edges. The edges represent all of the different lines that go in between the different nodes that once you've got the addresses matched up, then you can connect it with any of the entities and join it with the officer data, join it with intermediary data, etc.
Okay, that was a lot. You even confused me.
Okay,
now,
good.
one more time in plain English.
In plain English, there's one table that has all the addresses, but there's no other information in there.
Right, okay.
So then I need to use the edges data table to join it with entities so that I can get the name of the entity, for
And
example.
so all those addresses, those are what addresses?
Those are the addresses that were part of the Paradise Papers leak.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Now, onto the edges from the addresses.
So the address may be connected to like 5 different intermediaries.
Right.
So 5 different intermediaries might be using the same address. So instead of having the address multiplied out 5 times, it's just in there once.
Mm-hmm.
But it's connected using this edges table to 5 different entities.
5 different potential intermediaries.
Exactly.
Okay. And then from there?
From there, now you have the entity information about the name, and then you connect entities with the directors and all the. So that's where all the other connections can be.
Right. So ultimately, those entities,
Yep.
based on information like the address
Yep.
having been joined through the edges,
Yep.
is what we might want to match up against, say, our vendors, as an example.
Well, actually, I would just start with the addresses. So here's the view of what we're looking at here.
Okay.
So I start with the USA spending data. So I have, for example, contractor 1, contractor 2, contractor 3. Each of these different contractors has an address. I do some cleaning and fuzzy matching against the Paradise Papers addresses. So I
Right.
have
And
address
those could be, by the way, that could have been, you did it with, this is spending data, so this included contractors. But in our organization, we could do it with contractors,
Yep.
vendors,
customers,
even employees.
employees, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have any that's, we could match our employees against the Paradise Papers addresses.
If I'd have ghosted an employee and then was having the money sent off to who knows where.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then I had to, the addresses only get you the address. Like it just means that you have a hit.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you what it's hitting to. So then I need to join against the edges table, and then I join it against the entities table so I know what.
Okay. So those that aren't super savvy, the edges table is basically a many-to-many join table to help understand.
I don't think you've made it any less technical for those who aren't savvy, but yes, you are correct.
The edge connects an address to a potentially shady entity.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So what did we find? I'm just going to load up and show you like how this looks in the software. So first of all, I've downloaded the Paradise Papers data. So this is, for example, what you get when you open up the Paradise Papers addresses table. You get all this information about what the address is, what country it belonged to. Now, there was some challenge in here because there's a bunch of data in here that doesn't have the country data filled in. So you can use ACL Analytics to clean that up by looking for the keywords of countries elsewhere within that record. So you'll notice that in the original data, for example, this didn't say Malta, but I know based off of other information on this record that these are Maltese addresses.
Right.
So a great way of doing data cleansing is to be able to create a set of rules. So I'll show you, for example, these rules that are in here. So if I find Malta anywhere else in the record, put it as Malta, Taiwan, Hong Kong. They actually had some misspellings that I found as well for Taiwan. So I filled some of those in. So this is how you can apply data cleansing to your data so that you can collect some of those oddball, dirty data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is especially problematic with addresses.
Yeah, and also with the source of the data, which is ultimate. I don't know if you know, but the original Paradise Papers data was in PDFs and all this other.
Right.
Yeah.
So it came out of crappy. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is very important to clean that data. So once
Okay.
it's cleansed, then I join that together with. I'll show you the contractor data. So this is the contractor data. So this has a very rich information about what department it is from, what the address is, what the address was, what the description of the award was. It's very rich data from the USAspending.gov.
Right.
So after I've joined that all together, I get these 74 hits.
When you say 74 hits,
Yep.
the reality is fundamentally here what we're looking for. I just keep reiterating because you talk really fast and this is technical. So, reiterating, when you say we have 74 hits,
Yep.
we found 74 spots where, in this case, U.S. federal government was spending money with folks that were their address linked to these intermediaries that look to be potentially shady folks hiding money in
Correct. In
these
some way
locales.
connected in the data set in the Paradise Papers leaks.
Right. So this isn't a hard and fast, you found 74 times where fraud was committed.
No.
But we have 74 risk indicators for potential issues of corruption.
Correct.
Okay, brilliant. That was really slick.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. So
How long did it take you to accomplish that? Just curious.
like soup to nuts, probably of effort of mine, probably about 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
To actually do all the downloading, looking at the data, cleaning
Right.
it up, and
And,
joining it together.
and you don't have much of an ego, Phil, but I once heard you refer to yourself possibly as the greatest ACL scripter alive.
Yes, I am.
Nice to see that ego is tame as it is. So if it took you 4 to 5 hours, how long would it realistically take somebody who understands data but's not necessarily an analytics expert?
I would say a couple days. Yep.
So a couple of days of work to make this kind of check.
Yep.
I think that's worthwhile investment for 74 risk indicators of corruption issues that might need to be investigated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. On we go.
And so as we take a look at some of these, I just pulled out a couple of the larger examples.
74 risk indicators. Now you're going to investigate a couple of cases.
Yeah, this is where your auditor and investigator hat gets put on and you start digging
Exception remediation.
in. Exactly.
Yep.
The first one that I'm going to pull up is a contract for $961 million to...
Oh, is that all?
Yep, it's a small amount to Terramark Federal Group, and the address that it was listed for Terramark Federal Group is at 22001 Loudoun County Parkway in Ashburn, Virginia, which matches onto the Paradise Papers mailing address for both WorldCom Global Networks Limited as well as for MFS Cable Co. US. And WorldCom Global Networks Limited is actually connected as their business address to Bermuda.
Okay. And so we don't actually, neither you or I know anything about any of these organizations. This is probably totally on the up and up, surely at that contract size.
There's probably plenty of eyes on it.
Plenty of eyes on it.
Yep.
So this one likely isn't a problem, but it shows the connections. It shows the connections and how we might think about it as a risk professional in a corruption kind of context.
Yeah, I mean, in this, and you were talking about this being a tool for tax authorities. So now, if this was a vendor of mine, I might not care that much. But if I'm a tax authority and I'm seeing that we're paying $961 million contract to this Terramark Federal Group that has ties to Bermuda, then the question is, are they appropriately reporting all of their revenue for tax purposes?
Just a risk indicator.
It's a question, right?
Yeah.
So it points you to the right direction, to the right questions.
If I were a tax authority or if I were just an internal auditor, it would help me consider where I might spend my time looking.
Exactly.
Okay.
Good to note that all of this data is coming from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Just want to make sure that that's clear, that this is where this data is coming from.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
We need to...
Good
sure
job,
that's clear.
journalists.
Yes. The next one was a set of contracts totaling $21 million to a worldwide corporate housing LP. And their address is listed as 2222 Corinth Avenue in Los Angeles, which also happens to be the business address of Oakwood Worldwide Insurance Company, which is connected as the registered office for R&B Realty Group, which is also based in Bermuda. So this is another potential place to look.
So potentially, it's probably the case again that Worldwide Corporate Housing probably just happens to be in the same office building as Oakwood Worldwide Insurance Company. But nonetheless, we're evaluating our risk indicators.
Yep.
Got it.
Instead of looking at tens and hundreds of thousands of contracts, we're looking at 74.
Right.
And then the final one that I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention here is just around Science Applications International, a $1.9 million contract for IT and telecom systems analysis. So they have a business address that is linked to an SAIC Bermuda, which was listed in the Paradise Papers. So that's just the fact there.
Yeah. Okay. Those are really interesting hits.
Yeah.
Are your third parties on the list? Are your third parties your employees, your customers? Anything else you want to tell us about today, Phil?
No, that's it. I hopefully I've given people a bit of a teaser on where to get started on this stuff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. If you found something useful here, we'd appreciate you liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and you know what? If we don't get some likes, we'll make sure to never have Phil back again. Phil, thanks for joining today.
Cheers.
Cheers. Don't break your computer.